Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today a topic, it's a little bit of a continuation from last video where we talked about how to get sponsors. I said getting published in magazines is a really great way to go about that. So today we'll talk about how to get your stories and photos published in magazines. They could be print magazines or online. So I've been published in about 12 or 15 magazines now, and it's been a really long road to get to that point. It was only about 7 years ago I dreamed of getting published, and now here I am today. So in those 7 years, I went from never having been published to most of the time now, 99% of the articles I submit, they do actually run. So I can teach you what I learned along the way. If you're interested to learn more, stick around, I'll get into all the details right now. So when it comes to getting your stories and photos published in magazines, I would say the first thing you need to think about is why are you interested in doing that? And obviously getting sponsors, getting more media coverage is one angle. Trying to earn money is certainly another angle. And I can tell you, I definitely would have run out of money long before I finished my Africa trip had I not been writing for so many magazines. So certainly it is a valid way to help pay for your trip, but also there's another reason, and it's kind of the reason that I got into all of this. I'm just passionate about sharing my stories and showing other people what's out there and what's possible. And I really did come into this as just an ordinary guy setting out to live my dream and drive to Argentina. And so I started out just writing on my website. I had a blog, I was putting all the photos and all the stories out there for free because I just wanted to show people. And that kind of extended to getting it into magazines as well. And for me, it also provides a little bit of validation that what I'm doing is actually legitimate and people out there in the world care about it. And maybe that's part of my personality, or maybe that's partly because I travel solo and I have this desire or this need to share and to get feedback from other people. So have a bit of a think about why are you interested in getting your stories and photos published, because that's going to help motivate you when it comes to the hard work. The next most important thing you can do without question is to start practicing, and you should start practicing today. So the easiest thing to do is start a blog or start some sort of journal where you're starting to write down some of your stories, some of your trips, some things you've done, some lessons you've learned. Whatever you feel like writing about, you should start writing about it now. And from experience, I wrote well over 100 blog posts before I started sort of getting into the rhythm of what am I going to write about, from what angle will I tell the story. I wrote a few stories in present tense, I am here, it is interesting. I wrote a few stories in past tense. I drove around Africa, I had a good time. And sometimes I experimented trying to write things in future tense. Next week, I will be driving through Kenya. I am excited to see what it looks like. So playing around with tense is a really good experiment. You need to test yourself, you need to practice. Sometimes it's hard, I'm an engineer originally, didn't study creative writing, didn't take any courses or anything like that. So for me, it didn't come naturally, and it wasn't easy to put all these words on paper and have them make sense. And you need to be consistent with things like tense. You need to be consistent with, if you've introduced a character, later on, they need to have some payoff. Why are they in the story? What's the relevance? If you mention something about you're worried your vehicle might break down, you need to circle back to that later and discuss, did it break down or not? So there's all these kind of skills that go into writing, and the best way you're going to get them is just to practice, and the best time to start practicing is right now. Exactly the same advice for your photography. And it's definitely a fact these days, you have to have good photography if you expect to get published, especially in print magazines. Their requirements keep going up and up. They're not interested in your blurry cell phone snap. They're not interested in just holiday photos. That era has come and gone. The requirements are much higher. So my best advice to you, again, is to start practicing. You need to get the basics right. You need to learn how to crawl before you can learn how to walk. So get out there with your camera, start taking photos. Think about keeping the horizon level. Think about what is the subject of your photo. Think about the rule of thirds. If you don't know what that is, give it a quick Google. And something that really helped me was always thinking about, I want to put my subject in the midground of the photo, but I want to try really hard to have some foreground interest, something that's kind of interesting in front of the object, then the object itself, which hopefully everyone's looking at, but then also something behind it, some sort of background to the photo. This is going to make your photos feel way more three-dimensional and way more real. And I have a lot of fun now when I look back from the photos I took in South America to the photos I took in Africa, the vast improvement. And it's not because I got a better camera, it's not because I started editing them on my computer, it's because of how I chose to put things in the frame. And as well as that, how careful I was of lighting. I'm breaking the rule right now, the sun is actually over my shoulder, so the exposure on this video isn't fantastic. When you're taking your photos, you want to try really hard to have the sun behind the camera so that the light is on your subject, especially at sunrise and sunset when the light's going to have that magic quality. Make sure you get out of bed, make sure you're up late, play around, get the lighting, get the subject. And if you're not sure on what photo you want to take, my experience, my advice is take a couple. Kneel down and take one where your subject is really big in the frame, step back a bit and stand up and take another one, walk around and take another one from a different angle. And then later when you're reviewing them on the computer, you can flip back and forward between them and think about which one you prefer, which one's more pleasing, why, does it make the photo balanced, is it too overpowering? All those kinds of things go into your photography. And yeah, I bought a few books from secondhand stores to try and improve my photography, but really the number one thing I did is I just practiced, and I practiced a lot. So you're practicing your writing, you're practicing your photography, and you're starting to get to the point where you want to write stories about your trips. And so the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is to plan the story that you want to tell. Especially these days, if you want to get in a high-end magazine like Overland Journal or Tread, it's not enough just to tell a story about, you drove to Alaska. Day one, lots of driving, it was good. Day two, saw a moose, had a good time. That's really not going to cut it. Instead of focusing on the big overall trip, zoom in on one tiny aspect. Maybe when you were driving the Dalton up to the Arctic Circle, you got a flat tire. That can be the whole focus of your story, just that little zoomed in aspect of what happened. So what I try really hard to do is have an introduction to my story where I set the scene, and maybe I go a little bit abstract. Maybe I talk about the fear of breaking down and being stranded remote or something like that. Then the meat of the article, which is what actually happened. Kind of, I went here, I did this, but obviously you're going to have way more descriptive words and make it engaging and interesting. And then at the end, I really want to have a paragraph or two that wrap it all up and relate my introduction, where I talked about the fear of breaking down, back to the story where, oh gee, breaking down wasn't actually as scary as I thought it was going to be. So, that's one way I could tell the story of having a flat tire. Or I could talk about, fear of the unknown. I could talk about the extreme weather. I could talk about how great it is to travel with other people. I could talk about how driving at night is really intimidating because of all the animals. All of those different kind of hooks or leads or whatever you want to call it, they all work, and you could tell that same story. But the thing is, you need to tell the story in an engaging way. You can't just ramble on about day one, day two, and so on. Now that you've been practicing for a while, you've written some blog posts, things like that, you might think it's time to start approaching magazine editors. And definitely, there's no way to get feedback without actually approaching them. But something that I've learned over the years is sending out a cold email has never ever worked for me. Tons of advice online says, send them a pitch that says, hey guys, I'm thinking about writing this story about when I drove to the Arctic Circle and I got a flat tire. And it's going to be about 3,000 words, and it's going to have 20 high resolution images. What do you guys think? Do you want to run that story? ? If you fire that email off, I feel 99.9% sure you'll never get a reply. And the reason is, I think, magazine editors are swamped, they're overworked. They probably get 50, 100, 200 emails like that every single week. And when they receive it from someone they've never worked with, they're going to say, oh, that's great from this rando guy, but can he actually tell a story? I have no idea. What are his photos like? I don't really know. I've never seen his photos. So they're just going to move on and they're going to work with someone who they know tells a good story and they know takes good photos. So how do you get around that when you're beginning? The way to get around it, don't send them a pitch of your story, send them the actual story. So flip it on its head, write the story, do the best job you can, take the photos, edit them, put them all together and send them the whole thing. Put the photos in a Dropbox or something, email, say, "Hi editor, here's a story I wrote about my time in the Arctic Circle when I got a flat tire. Here are the 20 high resolution images that go along with it. Have a read and let me know what you think." I guarantee you any editor is going to look at that and say, okay, yeah, and they'll start reading. And they're going to read the first few paragraphs and they're going to look at the images and that'll give them a really good idea of if your story and if your photos are appropriate for that magazine. So that is the way that has always worked for me. And I think it's the best advice because it gets your foot in the door. And tons of editors, they'll come back to you and they'll say, oh yeah, can you make it a bit longer? Can you make it shorter? Can you focus more on this? Do you have any photos that include other people? So once they're hooked, once they're interested in what your story was and your photos, they might ask for some improvements or some changes, but most importantly, you got them hooked and you got them interested. And you did that because you actually sent them the story and the photos. You didn't just send them an idea for story and photos. When you're looking for magazines to submit to, my advice, and this has worked well for me, National Geographic, they're like the pinnacle. I think I could be at this for 10 years and still never have success. Overland Journal, they're the pinnacle for overlanding. Tread magazine, these are all very high quality, very top tier publications. If you're just starting out though, maybe you should look online and look for some free, kind of digital magazines, look for some ones that are, I don't want to say lower quality, but that aren't sort of the big prestigious ones, because that's how you're going to cut your teeth. That's how you're going to learn. And in fact, the first 10 articles that I wrote, I didn't get paid a cent. And that was okay because I was getting experience and I was learning and editors were giving me feedback. I was asking for input on my photos and they were really helpful things. They were saying, don't crop the photos to strange aspect ratios. We'll take care of that if we need to. So from now on, I just give them the full resolution and they crop it when they want to. Great. I didn't know that until I actually started submitting and I started getting that experience. So start out with free or online magazines. Start hitting up editors and saying, hey guys, I wrote this story about my drive to the Arctic Circle. Are you interested? Do you want to run it? And at first you're not going to get paid. That's okay because you're going to work up to it. As your photos get better, as your stories get better, you can slowly work towards that. Another tip that I can give you for taking photos, remember, it isn't about the vehicle. And this is a trap that I fall into all the time. And I know most of Instagram is just overlanding vehicles like mine, set up in some beautiful place. But a lot of magazines, they want more broad than that. Where did the vehicle go? What adventures did it take you on? Who did you meet? What wildlife did you see? What food did you get to eat? Take photos of all of that stuff. Take photos of people with the vehicle doing something. Maybe you took the vehicle to go kayaking. Great. Get a photo of you kayaking and maybe the vehicle's in the background. Maybe it isn't. I would say as a rule of thumb, probably only half of the images you submit even need to include the vehicle. And even then, probably only a couple of them is only the vehicle. Make sure that it's the vehicle and something, some animal or some, beautiful place or a waterfall. Don't just make the photos the vehicle. That's a really easy trap to fall into, but I think magazine editors are kind of getting sick of it. Another thing I can tell you is try not to get demoralized when you don't get a reply or when you get a rejection. I can tell you there was a day I sat down and I sent an article to 5 different editors and I was super excited. To this day, I've never heard back from one of them. They're busy, they've got deadlines, they've got people they work with. Who knows what the reasons are, but it's a reality that you're going to get rejections, or more likely, you're just never going to get replies from some editors. And that's okay, that's how it goes. Don't take that as an insult on your work. Just learn from it and move on and try different editors, try different magazines. in terms of what magazines you should try and pitch, that really depends on your interests. If you're straight overlanding, then yeah, eventually Overland Journal and Tread, those kinds of magazines are really good. But there's tons of crossover now with hunting, with kayaking, with rock climbing, with hiking. All of those are really coming across and involving overlanding. So if you go on some epic hunting trip and get an elk, there's magazines that are really now the crossover between hunting and overlanding, and definitely would be worth asking them. Same goes for whatever your hobby is or your passion. The standard advice used to be go for in-flight travel magazines, and I personally have pitched about 15 of them and never had a single reply. So I don't know if that used to work really well, maybe 10 years ago, but in my experience, I've never had it work. I'm not saying you can't, but that's just what I've experienced. All of that said, the most important piece of advice I can give you is just to keep practicing and keep growing and keep learning. If you want to improve your writing, buy a couple of the magazines you're interested in writing for and read the articles that are in there. Have a think about how did they structure their story? What did they focus on? What elements really drew you in? Was it the description of the people they met along the way, or was it just photos of their vehicle? I'm going to bet that there's something about the writing that kind of captivates you, the descriptive words that they're using or the way that they're putting sentences together. Once you've learned that, don't just copy it outright, but go and write your own story that maybe you'll never even submit anywhere, but write a story for your own learning where you try to do the same things. Think of some character you bumped into on your travels. Now go and write 5 paragraphs describing them. Talk about their teeth, talk about their hair, talk about the gravelly voice that they have. All of those things so that people are going to understand this character that you met along the way. Same story for the photos that are in magazines these days. Have a look at how they're doing it and try and recreate that photo with your own vehicle. You'll see tons of them now. They want vehicles in motion, which I can tell you from experience is difficult for me because I'm solo. A couple of times I had to put the camera on a tripod, set it up to take a photo every second, drive away from it, drive back towards it, and hope that it got a good photo as I was driving through the dust or the mud or whatever. Hopefully you've got someone who can drive the vehicle, you can take some photos of it. Play around, get the photos so that maybe the wheels are blurry because they're in motion, but the vehicle itself is very sharp and in focus. Again, this is all just practice. It's trial and error. The first 10 times you try and do that, you're probably going to get a blurry photo, but that's okay. We all did. Everyone who writes for magazines started out as a beginner. So above all else, just keep practicing, keep growing, keep learning, and slowly, slowly you'll improve and you will break through and you will start to get published and have success. So I hope that information's been helpful, and I hope it helps you practically get towards getting your stories and photos published. And you can see it's a lot like most of my advice, where I say start small, aim just for what you know you can achieve, and just slowly build on that, slowly work up to writing bigger articles, to taking better photographs. None of these things are going to happen overnight. You're not suddenly going to be an amazing writer, but if you work at it, you will get better, you'll get feedback, you'll grow, and over time, you will eventually get your stories published and you'll have more and more success. So if you've enjoyed the video, please do hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. New videos come out every Monday and Thursday. And I have to mention too, a huge thanks to my supporters on Patreon. Tons of new people have jumped on board in the last couple of weeks, and they're getting all the behind the scenes info of my next trip. I'm not only talking about where I'm going in the world and what vehicle I'll be building and driving, but I'm going through all of the whys. What is my rationale for each modification, for each decision about the vehicle, about the trim level, about whether it's gas or diesel, all of those types of considerations. I'm putting it out there for Patreons to learn, but also then they get to fire questions at me and I go back with more detail. So it's a huge big process here where I'm sharing my whole thought process and my whole thinking behind the vehicle and where I'm going and why I'm doing that. So if you're interested, there's a link in the description. You can check out my Patreon from just $5 a month. You'll be supporting me to make these videos for you, supporting me to get back on the road, And as a reward, you're going to get all this extra information. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.